exactly from the flight. The way you explained how the flight went from India to your destination and the visa process, it was like that. So thank you so much, sir. It gave us a view of how life was in the 70s and 60s. Thank you so much. We learned so much, and in the Pakrapo we have a view, no? Very different view, and you gave us okay, no, don't have that view, change this view. And also for the viewers looking at the online link, I'm sure they would have been oh, we would have definitely gone in person too, because this was totally picturesque. You gave us images, locations, and you're an amazing storyteller. I should say that. Thank you, sir. And our next speaker for today is Pradeep Chakravarthy, sir. And I'll invite Divakar, sir, to honor our guest for today. He's a behaviorist. Very interesting title, I would say. He helps organizations change behavior based on study of history and philosophy. He regularly conducts cultural tours in Tamil Nadu through the mystical Palmyra and has authored 5 books and several articles on history on leadership. He is currently working on his PhD on temples as socio-economic institutions. He is a graduate of LSE, JNU, and the school KFI, and has worked in TVS, Infosys, Cognizant, and McKinsey. So, a known name in the city, and someone we love listening to again and again. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. In a way, we come back to Chennai from the US, but in a way we don't also. If you look at the trajectory of when Sundaram Mama was talking about how temples started in the US and the role they played in the culture and the ethnic identity, you will see a very similar trend here also. I want to start this talk with a shloka that I picked up quite a while back. Agnirdevo dvijitinam muninam hridaya devatam pratima swalpa buddhinam sarvatra samsadanchinaha. The reason that I put the shloka up is we're very familiar with looking at temples as primarily religious institutions. You go there to pray. Yeah. But there's a fundamental difference in the way temples are seen in Sanatana Dharma compared to, say, Islam or Christianity or even the Jewish faiths. Temples for us are not just places of religious worship, but they're really a representation of the cosmic energy itself. And if you have to understand the role and development of temples in Chennai, you need to look at them not just as religious institutions, but also as institutions that have changed the way we connect with others and with ourselves as well. And I think that's a point that was very touched upon by the earlier speaker as well. And you will see that same trajectory here also. So when we talk about the growth of Madras, most people believe that Madras as we know it was largely the creation of the British. This is only partially true because all these villages that we know of have been here for not just a few hundred years, but almost 1,000 if not 2,000 years. I wanted to just go through a quick rundown of some of the important dates. 1522 was when Santhome was taken over by the British, or the Portuguese rather. 1639 of course was the year when the 3 square miles were given and Fort St. George came out to be the way we see it today. 1646 or 48 is when the two town temples got their gifts. So those, when we talk about the British history of Chennai, the town temples, Chennakeshwara and Channamaleshwara temples play a very important role, and we'll come back to them in greater detail. 1676 was when Triplicane became a part of Madras. 1693, Egmore, Purasavakkam and Thondiyarpet became a part of Madras. 1708, Thiruvottriyur, Nungambakam, Vyasarpadi, and what else? The Kottivakkam also became a part of Madras. 1733 was an important year for Madras when it comes to temples, especially the temples that we'd like to be looking at today, because that was the year Pitt's map was drawn. And Pitt's map is important for us because it gives us a sense of where each of these important temples were. 1734 was when Chintadripet was founded, and we're going to talk about those two temples today. 1742 was Veperi, Perambur, Pudupakkam, Ennur and Sadayankuppam. All of these were added to Madras. So these are the rough times, and then Adayar and that area seems to have been with the British part of Madras for a fairly long period of time. I kept trying to search for Kottuppuram and that Thiruvanmiyur and that area. So they've been with the British for a fairly long period of time. So I'm just giving you a sense of some of the important years when the East India Company or the British Empire, they annexed different parts of Madras as we know it today. And these villages typically came from the Nawab of Arcot, who was quite debt-ridden. And most of these were payments because he couldn't pay his debts, largely, by and large. The point that I'm trying to make is that these villages that came together to form Madras some of them were very small towns, but many of them were important villages with large temples. So when we're using words like Thiruvanmiyur and Tambaram and Nungambakam, these are not words that were there during the British times. These were there for 1,500 or even 2,000 years old. So I just want that to sink that in with the audience, to know that these are the words themselves are as old beyond the identity of Madras as we see it today, which is largely of a colonial manufacture. So this map kind of gives you a sense of how the city has grown, and I guess if you put in maps today, you'll see the city is growing even further today. So my first example today is going to be Thiruvottriyur. Venkatesh thankfully gave me a lot of scope. He said pick on any topic that you want and pick any number of temples. So I've been fairly arbitrary in my choice. I've chosen not to take Kapaleshwara temple or the Triplicane temple because most people can't think beyond that. I've taken 2 old temples and 2 relatively newer ones. So we're going to have a nice balance of the pre-colonial era, and we're going to have a balance and the colonial era as well. And you'll see the purpose, and this is something that I'm glad Sundar Mama spoke about this before, and I'd like you to continue to observe this very carefully. The purpose and the way the pre-colonial temples interacted with the local community was very similar to the way the early American temples interacted with the local community. The way the colonial temples interacted with the local community is I don't know, I'm not the expert on the American temple behavior patterns, but it's very different in the way the older temples interacted with the local communities. I wanted to pay special attention to this. I think today the beauty of Madras is we have heritage speakers of all shapes and sizes. If you are coming for this talk to get a lot of information, you may be a little disappointed. My trend these days is to give you more ideas to think about, and for lenses for you to look at your own life in a slightly different way, rather than giving you a lot of information, which I'm sure there is enough on the internet and in libraries. So this is the point that I'd like you to think about. Thiruvottriyur is an important temple that we pick up, and for me, it is one of the important temples because a lot of my research is focused on how do we look at behavior of the past as being connected to the behavior of the present and therefore to the future as well, when it comes to changing the work of behavior in the corporate institutions that I work for. And all my research basis for that is from temple inscriptions. And among all the Chennai temples, Thiruvottriyur has a maximum number of inscriptions. So for those of you who want to study what was daily life like, for not for the big kings and the queens, but for people like you and me, what was life like in the Chola period of 1,500 years old, 1,500 years back, and maybe even the Pallava period 2,000 years back, Thiruvottriyur would be the first place for you to stop at. So the advantage of the Tiruvottur temple is because of the phenomenal number of inscriptions, we get a very good idea of the Chola administration of its empire, and we get this in many other places as well. So the words may be different, but the administrative system was largely very similar. The country would of course be the Chola kingdom. The state would be a mandalam. So Sri Lanka would be a mandalam by itself. This region till about where Trichy starts would all be Thonday Mandalam. So there's a substantial part, almost much smaller than the states that we think of today, but importantly large enough for that time, 1500 years back. A district would be Kutram, Kotam or a Valanadu. And all the examples of inscriptions that we have, all of Chennai that we have today, largely fell into Puliur, Pural and Amur. Any guesses on where Puliur is? Kodambakam, absolutely. So very, very nondescript, small Shiva temple there, but it must have been a very important power center for the Chola Empire. Your taluk today would be the Nadu of the old, and a Nadu would be held by a Nadalvan who would be some kind of a governor of the province. The Nadus that we typically find in Chennai inscriptions from about 1500 years back is Kotur, Ermur, Ambattur and Amur. The cities were a little different. So you would have villages which would have to pay tax to the king. In exceptional circumstances, you would have villages which were also in a way union territories that we see today. And these would be places like Taniyurs. Yeah. So for a short while, Mr. Sundaram, your village was a Taniyur at one point of time. Veeravanallur at one point of time for a short period in the Pandya Chola period was a Taniyur. Now what is a Taniyur? A Taniyur is a place where their rules for tax collection and tax allocation to the king was different from other villages, and they had a modicum of self-assessment, self-assertment in terms of how they decided on their relationship with the king. So it's a very, very well thought out, very rare to find a number of Taniyurs in Chennai. Manali was the only Taniyur, and Manali must have been very prosperous at that time, very key to the Chola Empire, not only because of its connection to the sea, but also because of salt pans. So commercial importance is very high. There is a possibility the king would have special tax privileges, and that would be a Taniyur. So you have one Taniyur in this area. A town would be a Nagaram or a Mangalam, and I'll come back to these terms a little later. A village would be an Ur. An Ur is typically a place where the farming community was very popular. Nallur would be very different. It would be a village that was created for a farming community by a king's direct order. So an Ur and an Nallur will not be the same. They may have, farming is important, but the creation-wise an Ur and an Nallur will be very different. And we had councillors in those days. We had Sabha, Natar, Mudali, and we have a very rare, unique councillor called Alanganathar, which only Velachery has. We don't find that word anywhere else. So it's evident that villages had very different systems of administration, and these administrative systems were just as efficient, and you will see this a little later, if not more efficient than the way that we see this today. And I'm not going to go into this in a lot of depth, but for those of you who may not know, and that many of us believe that democracy and elections were a gift that the British gave to us. Not at all so. We've had a long tradition of democratic elections in Tamil Nadu. Manur in the Pandya country is the oldest inscription from about the 8th century. Uttarmerur, not too very far off from here, is one of the most popular inscriptions. So this gives you a sense of, from a geographical and from an administrative perspective, thanks to the many of the inscriptions from Tiruvottur, we get a sense of what the administrative divisions of Madras would have looked like 1500 years back. Yeah. So what would a village normally have looked like? Your Mylapore, your Triplicane, all of these villages, what would it have looked like? The temples were extremely important. The village, the image is a little warped. I'll explain it to you though. You have the river on the top. The Durga shrine would typically be north facing with her back to the south. Durga was the goddess of war. She would face the north, and she would turn her back on the south, which was the direction for the Yamaloka, or for where the ancestors would, the ancestral folks would live. Many of the solar deities had by then assembled into the Vaishnavite cult, so Vishnu would typically be on an east-west axis. The Shiva temple, which be further south, almost close to the Mayanam or the crematorium ground, because by then a lot of the Shaivite worship had been closely associated with death and allied areas. The Saptamatrikas are an important one. I put them just near the Shiva temple. The Saptamatrikas are a group of 7 goddesses who are a combination of the more Sanskritic, Brahminical gods and the local traditions of mother goddess worship. And these Saptamatrikas would typically be found next to the common property of the village, and the most important common property of the village would be the water body or the lake, not the river but the lake. There are only 3 independent temples for Saptamatrikas in Tamil Nadu. Very rare to find independent images, otherwise you'd find them in the Shiva temples. One of them is in Velachery. You cannot believe it. The road loops this way. Dandeshwara temple is on the left side, and on the right side is a Seliaman temple, which looks like any of your modern roadside Puliyar temples. But please go in and have a look. The shrine must be at least 1,900 years old, if not older than that. So very rare to find Saptamatrika images, and we have one here. The Nagaram was where the trading community lived. Not necessarily the Nagaratars as we know them today, but they may have been other castes and communities as well. The Ur would be the places where the agricultural community lived. And even for those of you who've been to a lot of the villages in the old days, you would have found that even in villages, communities tended to stay together. And that was largely a very old 1,500-year-old pattern. So unfortunately, we don't have maps anywhere. Yeah. But in reading inscription, land grants, you can start making reasonably accurate assumptions of how the village would have typically looked at. In Chennai, in all these villages, given the kind of inscriptions we have, except for Tiruvottur and maybe Mylapore, none of the villages were very wealthy. They were all fairly small temples, much smaller than the room that we are standing in, much smaller. I think today Dandeshwaran temple, Velachery, is a very good example of what an Chola temple or generally what a temple in Chennai would have looked at, or the Chennai villages would have looked at about 1,500 years back. Which means houses would have looked thatched houses. This is a photo from around 1850 taken in Thirumayam, nothing to do with Chennai. But just to give you a visual image of how streets would have looked at, certainly streets would have been very clean because there would have been no plastic around. And the water bodies would have been full because we've seen even the 1850s photos across Tamil Nadu. Temple tanks are always brimming with water, always, yeah. And there was no Photoshop in those days. But we do know that in some of the temples, because of literary evidence from the Devaram mostly, that the villages of Chennai also had brick houses, stone houses, and houses with a first floor or a second floor. So there have been some exceptions, but largely they would have been very simple houses where people lived in in communities together. So let's come to Tiruvottur. The Tiruvottur temple dates from at least about the 7th century. We have some earlier inscriptions, but they're heavily damaged from the Pallava period. 7th century onwards, we have both inscriptional evidence and literary evidence as well. Like I said, it is our largest ancient temple in the city, and it's a shame that most of us focus on Mylapore and Triplicane. Very few of us might have even gone to Tiruvottur, which is quite a shame actually, and I would strongly encourage you to go there and see the temple for yourself. 3 saints in the Thevaram have sung about the temple, and at least 2 of them have a lot of mention of the merchant community which lived in the region. Yeah, and I wanted to give you a sense of what kind of taxes that we have information from the Tiruvottur temple. We have and these are from different Chola kings. We have Pupun, Panchavaram, which must have been some kind of a caste-based tax, Vellikkasu, Neervilai, Vetti, Muttayal, Eechoru, Kudamai, Melvaram, and others. Ammangi was a tax that was given, or rather forced to be paid by a person who had to give free labor to the state. Yeah, and there's another word, Vetti. What does Vetti mean today in Kochcha Tamil? Jobless, right? Jobless. But the Chola meaning of vetti was forced labor. So people who had to do forced labor, that task of doing forced labor was called vetti. So these are the kind of examples of taxes that you get. Otri means mortgage. Adi also in a way means principal. So where this word Otriyur came, where Adipurishwara came, miss of time, not very sure. We can make multiple guesses. But what is very clear is multiple traders and members of the trading community have had a very powerful control of Thiruvottur. Thiruvottur had been visited by many, many kings across many times because of the trading community. And you have multiple inscriptions of trade guilds which existed in Thiruvottur. Maybe they connected with Manali as well, and we have Mylapore as well. Our own Mylapore had a lot of trade guilds as well. These traders would meet together, they would fix prices, they would regulate customs and tolls, prices for customs and tolls, and they will have a lot of funding for cultural events as well. So it's an old tradition. We have in Mylapore, for example, we have a trading community which worked with the trade guild of Thiruvottur, and they funded the construction of a wall for one or two of the temples in the different villages. And there's another inscription which talks about how the traders got together and they made life easier for the Nana Desis. The Nana Desis were a group of merchants who traveled from the east coast to the west coast. So I'm assuming Nagapatnam to Muziris, or one of those routes across. And these traders were very important because they were a very important source of tolls and taxes for local villages. So villages would go out of their way to support the Nana Desis, because if the caravan passed through, they would have to pay tolls and taxes, and that was a great way for the village to earn money. Otherwise, money was quite difficult for the villages to earn. And the Nana Desis always had a problem because they were eternally fearful of highway thievery. So trade guilds and villages would often work with each other or by themselves to reassure Nana Desis, to give them protection land, to give them safe passage, so that they could also do their job and give tolls and taxes as well. So there's some information that you get. When it comes, so I've talked a little bit about the life of Sundaramurti Nayanar and Patinathar. So Patinathar is the patron saint for the Nagarathar community, which is our most predominant trading community in Tamil Nadu. His life story is revolved around a place very close to Thiruvottur, and even today his wedding, his celebration is all conducted by the Nagarathar community over there. So again, there's a very strong commercial link. Sundaramurti Nayanar was one of the important Nayanmar saints. He lived in Thiruvottur, he married in Thiruvottur, and he moved on. So and we can do a separate talk at some other point in time on the Devaram and Divya Prabandham and what they tell us about the different places of Madras. But today my focus is going to be only on inscriptions, not looking at the literary sources. So in that way, in terms of literature, in terms of inscriptions, Thiruvottur is extremely important. And if you had to look at one temple that could give you a very holistic view of what pre-colonial Madras looked like in about the 1500 years old, Thiruvottur would be your place. Moving on, many kings and VIPs visited Thiruvottur. Kulothunga III and Rajadiraja were some of the two very important kings. We have a rare inscription in Thiruvottur of a Talakolli Pattam being given. And I think this also nicely segues into the earlier talk that we heard about art and culture. Among the Devadasis, today unfortunately Devadasis are mostly a bad name and they're known as women of ill repute. Nothing can be further from this in the ancient past. The most cultured, scholarly people, not even women, people of the community would invariably be the Devadasis, apart from the Brahmins who had to, manage the town and the judicial affairs of the king and so on and so forth. And certainly at a time when women had pretty much no rights, especially when it came to holding property and bequeathing property, Devadasis could own property in their own right, and they could decide on what they did with their property. In Thiruvottur, as well as in many other parts of Tamil Nadu, we have multiple inscriptions of some of the largest public funding work done by the Devadasis. So, sir, again, it's an old tradition for artists to actually support the community in some way. And Tiruvottur, we have 3-4 examples of Devadasis not only investing pujas in their name, because a puja meant more people will be fed. So some of it was religious, but a lot of it was a social service as well. And not in Chennai, but a little further down south, many irrigation works were also commissioned by Devadasis. So very important. And among these Devadasis, in the Chola period, the greatest honor a Devadasi could be given was to get what in the Chola period was a Talekoli Pattam. And we have some information about the Talekolis in the Silapadigaram, but from the inscriptions we know the Talekoli Devadasi was a Devadasi who had the right to have a maiden walk in front of her who could hold on to a staff, and the staff would be of wood but coated with gold, or I'm guessing gold for sure, and the top of the staff would have a knob which would be inset with many precious stones. And this was a great honor given, and Tiruvottur had a Talekoli like that, was very close to the king. So that's an important inscription that we knew. Much information about the government. So when it comes to the government, the village republics were very, very jealous about guarding their rights of tax giving to the king. And there are multiple cases in Tiruvottur where the king has come on a royal visit. The local community goes and says, look, here is a place that you've taxed. It's been too high. It's not fair. You need to change it. And invariably the kings would change it. In another time, the village assembly went and petitioned the king and said, you did the wrong thing in giving irrigation rights to another person without checking with us. Because if the upper part of the river has new irrigation rounds, then water to our part is compromised, and the king actually changed it. Yeah. So imagine at a time when the king was equal to God, for a community go and petition against the king and win the petition, quite unusual. We also have in Tiruvottur, there was a large matha and a Mathathipati as well, and much of the Mathathipati's visits were to get more funding for the Matham itself. And the Matha not only had educational facilities, they also had free food. So they had a chowltry as well. So a lot of social service facilities as well. One of the most fascinating inscriptions on Tiruvottur is not from the Chola time, but it's much later, from about the 15th or the 16th century. The Devadasis in the Tiruvottur temple went on a strike. They downed tools. They said, we cannot work. Now you can say 16th century, big deal, yeah, bunch of women went on strike in the temple, so what? Anyway, by then their morality a little bit had already been compromised, yeah? Not so. Because the Devadasis didn't do two of the dances, the temple ritual was not complete. Because the temple ritual was not complete, the administrative and political setup of the town came to a halt. Because the political and administrative setup of the town came to a halt, the tax didn't go to the king. And if the tax didn't go to the king, he could not sleep in the night peacefully. So this became a major issue, and it must have been like front page news of the time in the Vijayanagar Nayak Empire. The local Maheshwaras and the Sri Rudras, who must have been two sets of Shaivite priests, they tried to mediate it. It failed. They went on strike again. Then the governor tried to mediate. It failed again. The final time, the king himself came to mediate it, and then it seems to have sorted out because this issue didn't come again. And it's a shame that none of our dancers and musicologists have actually looked at this inscription in detail, because you get a whole... So what happened in the end was a compromise, yeah? That you keep one part, I keep one part. This festival you do, this festival I do. It's kind of like a custody rights kind of a thing. The rarity of the inscription is, in the agreement drawn, you get a long list of what were the kind of dances, what were the kind of ways of singing that was prevalent at that time. And it would be a lovely thing for somebody to actually do a full analysis of it, especially somebody who knows dance and music well. And the shame is, don't go too hard searching for this inscription in Tiruvottur, because this was on the floor, and I think that whole stone has been removed, or they put cement over it. So don't search for the original inscription. The text is, however, available in the Epigraphic Survey of India. So that's a rare inscription. We have multiple judicial decisions, and I'll just take one or two to give you a sense, to give you a flavor of the smaller things that have come up. One was in Kolattur, the local village watchman was not happy with the salary that he got, and he scooted. He left the village and he said, I'm not going to come back. I'm going to search for greener pastures. Yeah. Now, today you would say, big deal, man, watchman, so what? I'll hire another person. That's not how the community worked in those days. So a delegation of people went, they tracked him down, got him back, negotiated new terms, and put him back again. I think, and this is, I'm giving you one example, but from my PhD thesis, I can give you at least 1,500 examples. Across Tamil Nadu, you will find the fundamental rule here is, in society, it is always we over me, not me over we over me. So it is non-negotiable that you live outside the society. There's no two words about it. We have to live together. Yes, we will fight with each other. Yes, we are different. You will say black, I will say green, somebody else will say pink. Absolutely. But we have to live together. In fact, the biggest punishment you could expect was social ostracization. The biggest punishment, because it was always the community first and then me, which means I would talk about what are my duties rather than what are my rights. And today it's exactly the opposite. We talk about our rights, we don't talk much about our duties. And across inscriptions, you'll see all my hair has gone white doing this PhD dissertation. All of this is about conflicts and how conflicts were managed in temples. Systematically, you will see Chola period, Nayak period, you will see this is the thing. And in Thiruvattur, you'll have multiple examples. So this is one. Let me give you two other examples. The Pon Varyam was the committee that looked after the firmness of gold that was deposited to the treasury. The Chola king did an audit, and he found out that not only was the quality of gold incorrect, but the audit books didn't match. The amount that should have been there was not the amount that was actually there. So today you can put court in high court, or you can do a Vijay Mallya, and you can do whatever you want. That's not how it worked in Thiruvattur. The committee members were all very high-ranking people in the community. Their property was confiscated. The property was auctioned. The principal and the interest of that amount was taken from them, deposited into the king's treasury. The rest was given back, and they were ostracized from the village. Imagine if something like this could have been done today. Right? Look at how our courts work today. Look at how it was done today. So this was the higher caste people. There's also an example in Thiruvattur where two men went hunting. And when they went hunting, inadvertently, one man killed the other. So today the thing would be like that case that you talked about, right? So this was not the way they handled the case. So they did an analysis. They said, yeah, I admit my mistake. So they said, okay, you light a lamp, expiatory lamp in the temple, and you're free. The principle being that higher you are in the caste hierarchy, the stricter the punishment. Lower you are in the caste hierarchy, the more relaxed the punishment. Now, if you compare this with the way our courts operate today with rich people and poor people, exactly the opposite. So this is some of the things some of the information that you'll get. Thiruvattur is a lovely temple to talk about, and we can do a lot of conversations later, but I'm going to move on. And I put up these doors because at one point in time, Thiruvattur, the main temple's doors were made out of gold. Yeah, that was we have that information there. Thiruvanmiyur is the next temple that I'm going to look at. Give me a minute, let me just get there. So about Thiruvanmiyur, we know it as an ancient temple because about 6th, 7th century we have inscriptions. But largely the inscriptions for the Thiruvanmiyur temple, give me a minute. Where are my notes? They largely come from about 1012 to 1043. This is the time we get most of the inscriptions, and all of these are from the Ambal Sannadhi. So the tradition of having a separate shrine for the goddess usually comes from about the 12th or the 13th century. Thiruvanmiyur seems to have been a little earlier. So when we talk about Thiruvanmiyur, the land gifts are important. We know from the inscriptions that Thiruvanmiyur was a part of Kottur Nadu, Puliyur Kottam again. So imagine Kodambakam to Thiruvanmiyur. It's a long distance, even by today's traffic standards, but that's the length of the geographical division. So give you a sense. Jayamkonda Chola Mandalam was the overall mandala, or the overall taluk, or the state as it were. Many of the gifts were given to a bunch of Shiva Brahmanas over there, so must have been a fairly large, popular town. Some of the gifts are lotus garlands. this inscription here is a little damaged, but there's a logic to giving lotus garlands to temples. When you have to give a lotus garlands, now unlike today, these garlands in temples which are made out of lotus are very ugly, right? They just string them together. This is not the old tradition. Kerala still has a traditional way of making lotus garlands. The traditional way to make a lotus garland was you split the flower completely. Each petal you take and you string each petal, which means, you need many lotuses to cover just this part. It's like, leaves being pressed one over another. I think you get the sense of what I'm saying. So the reason for doing that is if you have to give only one lotus garland, you will need at least 20 to 30 lotuses. If you need 20 to 30 lotuses, you need a large pond. If you have a large pond, then it becomes one more irrigation source for the community. So even in thinking of a lotus garland, there'd be the thought of how do I put we over me? And you will find one or two examples over here. I don't know whether the Thiruvanmiyur temple tank itself was built like that, but the lotus garland, I thought it's an important information for us to share. Literary evidence on Thiruvanmiyur, we have something interesting, and I'm going to recite one of Appar Swami's Thevarams. Kundadum Samanar கொடுஞ்சாக்கியர் என்றவர்கள் குண்டாடும் சமணர் கொடுஞ்சாக்கியர் என்றவர்கள் கண்டார் தானங்கள் கருத்தவர் பேச நின்றாய் கண்டார் காரணங்கள் கருத்தவர் பேச நின்றாய் தீண்டார் விதியித்தார் திருவான்மியூர் உரையும் அண்டா உன்னை அல்லால் அடியேன் தவர் யானோ. So he says, குண்டாடும் சமணர். So today we say, kundaka mandaka pesardu. Kundadum, yeah? Kundadum is these wasted arguments, useless arguments. These Jains who make all these useless arguments. Kodun Chakiyar, these, Kodum is what? Is a very harsh word, right? These Buddhists who are very harsh people, useless fellows, they are all talking senselessly, yeah? And yet with so much of patience you're sitting in Thiruvanmiyur. Yeah, and in a place which is so wide that you can send two chariots at the same time. So the roads were quite big. Without you, Marandishwara, who else will I go to? So that's basically what he says. So what we get to hear from here is at least we know that there were Buddhist and Jain settlements over there as well. And older people who've been to the temple in the 70s and 80s, they have told me that for a long time, many of these stone sculptures are actually found inside the temple. Yeah, so I don't know whether it's still there now, Venkatesh.
It vanished after the last Kumbhabhishekam.
There you go. Right? So what happened, we don't know. But there must have been these images over there. Clearly, if Appar Swami never uses words in vain, and he is very careful about his choice of words, if he talks so much about Jains and Buddhists there must have been a substantial number of people over there. Yeah. So that's one conversation that I wanted to have. The important thing that I wanted to talk about here were actually the Borromean triangles and the prime knots. Yeah. Now I'm totally indebted to Arul Lakshmi Narayan and P.K. Arvind. One of them alerted me to this, and math, physics and me are quite far apart, but I wanted to talk a little bit about this. Now, you will notice in the first image, and I'm going to read from the notes, there are three identical overlapping equilateral triangles. Yeah. You ignore the 4-petal flower in the middle. That's not important for us. Look at the triangles carefully, especially the science and the physicists over here. You can notice very carefully, no two of these triangles are linked to each other, but all three are inextricably connected to each other. Can you see the looping going up and going down? Observe the image very carefully. No two are connected, but all three are closely connected with each other. Yeah. If I remove one of the triangles, the entire image will fall apart. It is very, very rare to see this kind of an image, and we don't know what the reason behind this image was. This is called the Borromean triangle because a similar motif, not using triangles but using circles, was often used in the Borromean family, which is a medieval Italian family. And the reason that they used this was that they and two other families, and remember in Italy during the Renaissance period and just before, every family was fighting with each other to become the Pope. It was a big conflict, and at least becoming a bishop was great, but becoming the Pope was the best. And there was a lot of money involved. It was a very powerful, it was not just political power, it was economic power as well. So the Borromean family their coat of arms would have to show that they were powerful, and they were powerful because they were connected with other royal families, and they had this triangle over there. The Borromean triangle is also, they're also called the Brunnian link, because this link of two things not being connected but the third being connected is also the Brunnian link. This is after the knot theory advanced by a German physicist called H. Brunn. This is not a theme, not a motif that is unique to Tiruvanmiyur. We have this in Scandinavia, where the god Odin has some kind of a weapon like this. You find this in medieval Christian traditions, because there the Trinity comes into play. And you find this in Japan as well. Incidentally, I think Arul alerted me to this. The Maths Institute is very close by to Tiruvanmiyur, and this is a part of their logo as well. So it's nice that they have this connection. I don't know how they got the connection. In physics, this becomes very important to look at three-body configuration of neutrons. And in DNA molecules as well, this has a correlation to that. And in quantum computers, this has some kind of a connection as well, as what I'm reliably informed. Why here, we don't know. Yeah. You can say the deity, the goddess is called Tripura Sundari, so it goes back to Shiva destroying Kamalaksha, Vidyunmali and Tarakaksha. Maybe it was about the three worlds. So you have Bhakti Jnana and Karma Yoga. You have Om is we have Shiva, Vishnu and Brahma, or the three goddesses. Maybe it's these multiple connections can be made. We're not sure why it is there, but the Borromean triangles are you find the yin and yang shape and all, you find it quite frequently across different places. This is very, very unique. The other image over there is a stevedore knot, which is a snake knotting itself. And this is also in some of the older temples you'll find, and even in jewelry you'll find this motif of the Brahmamudi, which is actually two interlinking knots, and you don't know where the knot starts and where it finishes. This is called also the prime knot, because it can't be composed of smaller knots. This is like the basic that can be done. And philosophically, it could possibly be a core belief in Sanatana Dharma that everything is connected with each other. Yeah, and everything is cyclical in life. I mean, for example, if you look at the way we concept time, the Western Gregorian calendar is linear, which is what we follow today. But our years are cyclical. So I think it may be a connection to that. Knots you will find in many temples from the Chola period onwards. This, by the way, need not necessarily be Chola, because it's in the outside mandapam of the Ambal shrine. Maybe Vijayanagar, 15th, 16th century. But quite technically, physically quite difficult to execute, and also deeply philosophical, and makes us think a little bit. So please, next time you go there, look out for this in the Amman shrine. So we wanted to, I'll take questions in the end, Raghava. Chintadripet is another temple that I wanted to talk about. Now we are moving now from temples that were the fulcrum of the local community, because everything that you expect from the government, the temple provided for the local community. We're moving away from temples like that to two temples from the British period, which had a very, very commercial role. So earlier on, political, emotional, and therefore commercial. Now commercial and therefore political and religious and emotional as well. So what was the reason for Chintadripet being formed? The Brits were here because of the trade in textiles. Now from the beginning, the markups were huge, and calico textile became so popular in England that they actually had to, the local producers had to actually look for a ban. And even today, if you go to the English country houses from about Georgian times, you'll find that the curtains, the dresses, the sofa covers would all be from our kalamkari, from our block printed textiles of that period. But the problem here was the British agents would come and advance a sum of money to the weavers and say, okay, 3 months, 4 months, this is the amount of bales of cloth that you need to give us. Now, like our very old carpenters and plumbers today, these guys will take the money, go spend it on booze, and you can't find them next time. So this is very unreliable for the British to work with. 3 months down the line, he comes, he can't even find the weaver, let alone find the bales of cloth. It didn't work. So by about the 18th century, or by about 1800s or 1850s, they had decided this system isn't working. We need to get these weavers in a spot, let them stay there. Maybe some collateral damage will go in terms of funding their houses and their all of that stuff. But unless they are in a particular place, we can't have control over them. So the earlier places were typically places like Manargudi, Salem, Odiyarpalayam. These are some of the areas where the villagers settled. This also, over a period of time, became a little unwieldy. Because Fort St. George was where the shipments happened. They had to go all the way from Salem, Odiyarpalayam and get it. So that was also a little difficult. So this system wasn't working either. So it's curious why they didn't think of Kanchipuram, because Kanchipuram has had a strong weaving tradition, but I guess they specialized only in weaves that the British were not interested in. So in about 1773 or 1774, they said, this is not working. Maybe we should bring them much closer home to Fort St. George. And hereabouts, when they did their travel, the weavers said, look, for us, the most important criteria is we need large open spaces with massive trees. Yeah, because most of the weaving and the dyeing and all of that happened outside, and you need the shade as well as the sun. Thiruvottur and Nungambakam initially were considered, and many of the weavers settled there. Imagine Nungambakam High Road today, weavers with large trees. Yeah, I can't even imagine it. Yeah, so but that didn't work. We don't know why it didn't work, but it didn't work. So Governor Pitt, the guy who did the map, he said this isn't working. So that's about 1774 thereabouts. This is not working. We need to get these guys from Thiruvottur and Nungambakam somewhere closer to Fort St. George and Old Madras as it is today. And he kept looking around for land. And the land that he spied was a garden that belonged to Sunkurama. Sunku means a kind of toll tax, yeah. So this guy must have been a tax collector of some sort from that period. Sunkurama had a large plot of land at a place where the Triplicane River takes a loop. And you have the Karneshwari temple and the Periyamate close by. And this place was given to him in permanency. And of course, Pitt said, that doesn't work anymore. I'm going to take it over. And that became Chintadripet. And when that became Chintadripet, they actually had a document drawn up of saying, these are the terms and conditions that we will adhere to. We will give you large trees. We will give you all the land, and you have to look after it now. Now, the person who did a law, and this was called Chinna Taripeta at that point of time, 1734, spinners, weavers, painters, washers, and dryers were all called to settle there. They were all guaranteed large roads with many shaded trees, and they were also told that disputes were only settled through arbitration and you couldn't take it to the civil courts. Now why were the British so worried about disputes being taken to the civil courts? We'll come back to that when we come to the town temples, because they must have been losing sleep over the number of disputes that were happening in the town temple area. So anyway, this was all done and all the shady trees were there. The whole job of looking after this, the agent became Adippa Nayaka. We don't know much about Adippa Nayaka. Must have been definitely from a Telugu speaking community, that much we know. So between about 1735 and 1743, he built the two temples. So there's a Vishnu temple and a Shiva temple there, and you must go and see this. More than the temples, in the front is a beautiful pond. And the pond always has water, and it's lovely to go and see it just for that pond over there. And he must have also commissioned this large Adhikaranandi. It's a good 15 to 20 feet high, gilded beautifully, and it is used even today. It takes a lot of effort to open that room and see it, but during, I don't know when, it must be during the Brahmotsavam time, if you go there on the day the Adhikaranandi Vahana is there, not only will you see this, so all of this is a good around 15 feet. So imagine 6 feet men are holding this, and then you have this for 15 feet, and over this you have a Prabhavali and an umbrella as well. So it may be a solid 25 feet, yeah, or a little bit more, and it is gorgeous. One of our finest examples of Baroque-inspired woodwork from the colonial period, and it is definitely a treasure for Chennai that you must have a look at some point in time. When we talk about the Chintadripet temple, I also wanted to read something out. So as Adippa Nayaka was getting money for constructing the temple, there were some allegations of corruption. Yeah, and this is what one of the British officers had to say. It has been in former letters been observed that in this country, men who are fond of shewing their wealth and grandeur have as yet found no better means of displaying them than by building of temples. Whether from these motives or to draw inhabitants to the new Peta, perhaps both, Narayan out of his own money built 2 pagodas there, and that they might not want proper endowments, he obtained not only from the inhabitants of every denomination in our bounds some contribution, but also from many of those in the adjacent districts, such as Poonamali and Tripasur countries, etc. These went under the name of voluntary charitable donations, but when it is considered what power and influence Narayan had over those people, it will easily be conceived that what was called voluntary, and even appears as such, at this day under the hands of some of the castes, was merely the tribute paid to power. Yeah. So it's an old tradition in India of politicians taking money for charitable causes of building temples. Yeah. So very, very commercial. But that poor man, despite all this effort, the temples didn't make any money. And he and his descendants lost a lot of money in Chintadripet as well. So I guess the only people who made any money were people who bought land at that time and still own it in Chintadripet. Yeah. So sorry, those are some of the things that I wanted to talk about. Now we'll end. The last ones that I wanted to talk about were the town temples, which are adjacent to the High Court. You can't talk about Chennai temples if you don't talk about the town temples, because for Madras, from the colonial perspective, these 2 are our really most important temples. A quick history of the town temples. I'm not sure if I have too many photographs. I do, yes. Okay, so how are the town temples created? April 24th, 1648, Beri Timmappa, who was one of the agents who negotiated the deal for Madras, Fort St. George, he and Narayana Payyar, they had a contract with each other where Timmappa seems to have made a substantial grant to the Madras Kesava Perumal Pagoda. And he says, for as long as the sun and moon rule the skies, this grant will be held valid, and if somebody takes away from this grant, they will incur the sin of having killed a black cow on the banks of the Ganges. Yeah. So whether those grants are still there or not, I don't know, and which black cow who killed, I don't know. But soon after, on the 13th of August in 1646, he gave another deed of gifts, and this also talks about only the Madras Kesava Perumal temple. So where the High Court is today, this temple must have been there. Now, between 1640 in the siege of France, the British realized that for them to protect Fort St. George, they needed a vast empty plain so that they could see the army approaching and they wouldn't be caught surprised. And they said the best way to do this was where the High Court is standing now, which is where the Black Town was, or where the weavers lived and all the Indians who was being helped by the British and the Fort St. George were living. So they razed that entire part of the city. And when they razed it, this was between 1672 and 1675, the temple was also razed to the ground. Yeah, and we don't know how that temple looked, but I have another image here, another reading from a missionary who had visited Madras at that time. And here's what he has to say about the old temple. Gosh, my eyes are a little bad. Just give me a minute. Madras divides itself into diverse long streets, and they are checkered by as many transfers. It enjoys some chowdhuries for places of justice, one exchange, one pagoda, which is the old temple in the High Court, contained within a square stone wall. Within this temple are a number of chapels, if they may be comprehended as that, because most of them resemble rather monuments for the dead than places of devotion for the living. One for every tribe. Not under one roof, but distinctly separate, though altogether within the square stone walls. They bear the name of one entire pagoda, which must be the Kesava temple. The work is inimitably durable because it's made out of stone. The biggest closed up with the arches continually shut, as where it is supposed to be hid their mammon of unrighteousness, they burying their estates here when they die by the persuasion of their priests towards their victim for another state. I don't think we buried too many people within temples, but anyway, that's what he thinks. Yeah, admitting neither light nor air, more than what the lamps always burning are by open funnels above suffered to ventilate, by which custom they seem to keep alive that opinion of Plato, in such a revolution to return into the world again after their transmigration according to the merits of their former living, those of a minuter dimension were open, supported by slender, straight and round pillars, plain and uniform up to the top, from where some hieroglyphical portraiture lends its assistance to the roof, flat with stones laid along like plants upon our rafters. And on the walls good sculpture were obscene images that I would hasten not to speak more about. Right? So quite contemptuous he was about our sculptures. So anyway, this had to be razed to the ground, and you can't live in a village without a temple. The weavers would have left, so they built a new temple. And what they did was they took the same amount of land and they looked at, which was about 23,994 square feet, and in that land, they built two temples, which is what we see today as a town temple. So it's a nice one. This image I really like because it shows you the Vishnu temple and it shows you the Shiva temple. And there's just a door that separates the two. 38 Malabar houses were demolished to build this temple, and that's how our town temples came. The two temples were the official temples of the East India Company. These were the only two temples where they were, for all temple processions, a badge of the Dawalis would have a badge of the East India Company, and they will hold a staff of the East India Company as a symbol of royal connection to the East India Company, and some portion of the taxes that the temple connected would also go to the East India Company, and the East India Company would pay for some of the expenses of the temple as well. But between 1716 and 1790, this is when that the Chintadripet example that I was talking about, these two temples gave the British a lot of trouble. The trouble was between the right-hand caste and the left-hand caste, and that's another conversation we can have at a later point in time. The right-hand caste and the left-hand caste were some kind of an occupational division that existed even during Chola times, and we have multiple examples during Rajaraja Chola's time and later of these castes bickering with each other. In the British time, it must have become very acute. It must have been completely horrendous for these British to even understand what this whole thing was of. And it's actually fascinating to read through that. Anything could cause a violent riot in the town. Yeah, and remember, those towns' streets were all small and no lights in the night, and must have been a nightmare to live there. So what were some of the reasons? One caste said that the Panniranda Nagaram was a set of shlokas that had to be sung in front of the Puliyar shrine. One caste said the other caste did not say it correct, and more important, the way they said it was cacophony to their ears. So one fight because of this. Yeah. The second fight was, how can your flag be bigger than mine? Second fight. Third fight. Why should your flag post be taller than my flag post? Then, of course, the big one was procession routes. So a lot of problems with this, and the British sometimes are even more confused because one of them says, what is this? Yeah, at least this right hand, left hand, we can understand. But these washermen and these oil mongers, every time they're switching sides. So we don't know where they're going to bring in problems. And all the time, the Muslims come in and they try and adjudicate. The Armenians come, they try and adjudicate. But somehow by the time around 1790 or 1800, these caste fights stop. We don't know why they stop, but they stop. So today these two temples are very peaceful, calm oases within the very noisy part of old Madras, but there was a lot of riots and things going on. The last thing that I wanted to add, and when you go there, you will see I've not got a photograph of it. On one of the temples is an image of a man in a very supplicant posture. That is Rottella Abbaya Chetty. And I want to end, I wrote about this some old book sometime, and there was an old woman who was sitting there, and she talked about festivals in those days. And she said temples were very wealthy, they would have a lot of money because they got rents, and many of the local community people were quite generous in their patronage of the temple, and they were all doing transactions, right? I'll give you 1,000 rupees, let me get a better dividend of 2,000 rupees. All transactions at that time. And she said, we used to have kalamkari textiles that would be on the floor and on the ceiling, and all the pillars would be plated with pith, and that pith would be beautifully engraved and painted, and every day there'd be so much of free food for everybody, so much, the best musicians will come and play there, and the best dancers will come and play there. It was a very beautiful picture that she painted. Unfortunately, I didn't take a photograph of it, but really I think when I listened to that old lady talk about her old memories, just because of that one stone sculpture, and I said, who is this man? A very different part of Chennai came alive. And while these temples were built at a time when they had a commercial motive. The commercial motive was, unless we have people come and settle here, we're not going to be able to make business. But for these kind of old women who were staying there, I think they had a very strong emotional connect as well. So I wanted to end with that and encourage you to go and see these temples whenever you can. Here's what I wanted to say to sum up. Temples are not just religious institutions. If you study these inscriptions in the temples, you will find that our needs haven't really changed. Our fears and our needs as human beings, whether it's 2,000 years back, today, tomorrow, we are still worried about respect, affection, safety, and it's not very different. Fear of being alone, fear of not being loved, fear of being judged, etc., etc., etc. And haven't really changed. Madras has a very delightful mix of old and new temples. Yeah, and I'd encourage you to look at the history of these old temples and the history of some of the new temples as well. They, especially the old temples, because of the inscriptions that they have, they give you a very accurate life, an accurate picture of what was daily life like. One is about all the kings and the queens and all that, but also, watchmen and potters and blacksmiths and disputes that they had, how they resolved them, that sort of stuff. They also give us a clue of how the attitudes and the beliefs changed, like I've been talking about in the past. The older system of working was that we need to live in the community together. We will be different. We will argue with each other. But at the end of the day, if we separate from the community, we will suffer and the community will also suffer. Because remember, in a village you would have had, and we have one example of a barber who was given a lot of weight. Why would a barber be important in a community? Because he was also the surgeon. He was a doctor for the community. Yeah, so everybody was important. Yeah, I mean, there were caste disputes and all that stuff, but the general principle was the community is more important. The needs of the community are more important than my own needs as a person. And therefore, the question is not, what are my rights? Are my rights being taken care of? The question that I need to ask myself is, what are my duties to the community? And am I doing those duties? So these are some of the things that I can glean from these temples, and they are, of course, lovely places for us to go to today, architecturally, aesthetically, and I'm happy that many of them are bringing a lot of the cultural performances into their scope as well. So I hope I've been able to give you a slightly different way of looking at temples in Chennai, and encourage you to go and visit these temples. Thank you very much.
We'll take questions, please.
Yes.
One information about this. Okay, 2 temples shifted from the High Court.
Yes, sir.
To the
Yeah.
present location.
Yeah.
In a year, on a particular day, the High Court gates are closed, and the key is given to the temple.
That is correct.
And an advertisement comes in the newspaper on that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's one of the old traditions. Huh? Oh, thank you very much for the photographs, Mr. Balasubramanian. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Slavery edicts. I'm very interested. Are there any slavery edicts about slavery culminated in Madras temples?
No, not in Madras temples. But slavery was present. We have inscriptions on that. I can't remember what the inscriptions are, Venkatesh, but yeah, slavery was very much alive. Yeah.
Will you get the point of it?
No.
Slavery in Madras.
Oh, no, exports of slavery you wouldn't get from inscriptions. You'll get them from Gazette records. Gazette records you'll even have from Tanjavur, how many people left, what caste they were. You'll have all the records over there. One sec.
The old Chennai, this Monday Mandalam,
Hmm.
there are more old temples covering Tirumulai oil and
Yeah, lots of them. The oldest is Pallavaram, which is now, I think, become a dargah, which is a dargah.
So when you study the old temples in the city, you have to include those temples also.
Yes. Yeah.
So that
I know, in 1 hour, this is how much I wanted to do. I wanted to give a mix, but you're right. Tirunirmalai, Tirumalizai, Mangad, they're all worthy of Punamalli. Not many, but I got to say though, if you zoom out and look at the number of inscriptions in each temple, Thiruvottiyur wins hands down because of commercial importance. Mylapore little bit, but then we don't even know where originally Mylapore was, and half the stone is not here anyway. Triplicane has the oldest inscription that we have. The other temples, not much inscriptions. If you compare it with Chola country and Pandya region and all that, because this area was only small villages. Except for Thiruvottiyur.
Different period of time.
Yeah, usually 1500, 2000 years back. That's
Very oldest temple.
we can't say, sir. We can't say. Inscription-wise, it is the Triplicane temple and the Mahendravarma's the Trisulam place. But you can't say. I mean, Thiruvottiyur or Mylapore. See, what is a temple? At the end of the day, if it's considered by the community as a place of sacred importance, even if Thiruvottiyur just had that ant hill and that was worshipped by the local community there, still a temple, no? So you can't tell. Can't tell. Any other, maybe one or two last questions? Yeah, Raghava. Okay, one question for you. Sure. Go ahead.
Why were so many houses destroyed for just 2 temples?
Good question. Yeah, but you need the space. They got the money, so hopefully they were happy with it. I guess they were paid money for it. Should be okay.
Sir, is there any caste-related inscriptions in this Madras temple that we talked about? Caste-related inscriptions?
No, not really, because by the time Madras temples had come into place, paper documentation came up. But the vestiges of Madras, yarpa low dane, love. I keep getting it low. So vestiges of old Madras available online to free download. Low discusses these caste disputes in great length. I would recommend you to look at that.
Generally, the temples are managed by some particular caste people. They only manage.
Oh, that okay.
Old temples.
Sure.
Even now also, they are only the
Yeah, sure.
managing festive and all.
Sure.
That has to be studied, I think.
Sure. Yeah, plenty to study in temples. I think there was one more question. Yes, sir. Last question. Yeah, looks like it. Yeah, looks like it. All of them are small villages. Koturpuram would also have been a small village. See, what do you mean by a small village? Yeah, there would have been some maybe maximum 500 families. Thiruvottiyur would have been really big, 1,000, maybe even 2,000 families, really big. Manali would have been big because that was a independent Tanur. Party would have been big. By the way, so I forgot to mention this is one last thing, one trivia for the day. Pakam means it is next to the sea. Kuruchi, next to the mountain. We don't have any Kuruchi over here. Ur, where the agrarian community is important. Nallur, an ur or a village that was formed by an explicit king's edict or a Brahmadeya. Chaturvedi Mangalam, where 4 kinds of Brahmin Vedic experts lived. What else do we have? Padi, where a cantonment was. So some broad. Cheri would have been a large community. Prosperous community, large community.
Along the
Cool.
We have 72 cherries along.
There you go. So prosperous. Because water is there, therefore prosperous.
It's not a slum.
No, not a slum at all. No. Not at all a slum. Yeah. Thanks, Venkatesh.
He deserves a big applause, and thanks Pradeep for a very enlightening. He's always a wonderful speaker to listen to. 2 points I wanted to mention here. The first city in the civilized world, the capital of Mesopotamia. You know what it was called? Ur. We have the same word coming here, the Ur. The second one is, last week we were celebrating the centenary of Vikram Sarabhai. Vikram Sarabhai, Madras Mapla. He took his bride from Harrington Road. Avadi Bakrapo, we have Mutaya Muralidharan. We have a Gaikwad of Baroda who took a bride from Alwarpet. And of course, the first, most important Maple of Madras was Sundarar. Sundarar married in Thiruvottiyur. We are always angry in Mylapore that Samandar refused to take a girl from Mylapore. Pumbavai's father begs, you gave her life, marry her. Na life kurthanala, I am her father. She is like my daughter, I won't marry her. So Mylapore ke kadakkaada lakku Thiruvottiyur kadachadu. And Thiruvottiyur is fantastic in the sense that I have a small, you connect things, okay? I come from the Nagarattar community. The Thiruvottiyur is very important to us because of Pattinattar. And those days when Nagaratars were traveling abroad, they used to go from Paulakarathira. That is the Coral Merchant Street. 3 chowdhuries there sent all the chettiars to Burma and the entire sector. And if somebody came and died here in Madras, they would be burnt only in Tiruvattiur. And the habit அப்படியே develop ஆனதால இன்னைக்கும் if any Nagarathar dies in Madras, the funeral is held in Tiruvattiur. So it also has a negative connotation. Temple போகலன்னா திருவத்தியூருக்கு போகலாம், ரொம்ப நாளாக போகல, திருவத்தியூர் போனியான்னு கேட்டாலே வேறு அர்த்தமாக இருக்கும் எங்களுக்குலாம். So that's why we always thought of that way. But the point is, Tiruvattiur is one of the most beautiful temples, the Prithvi Sthalam. We don't have a lingam there. We have an anthill. There's no abhishekam. மேலே புனுகு தான் சாத்தணும் திருவாரூர் மாதிரி. But it is so important because it is in the northern extreme of Madras. Thiruvanmiyur, of course, joined later. Thiruvanmiyurku romba history irukku. Valmiki must have been added later, but there's a lot of history. I am very happy that he covered these two. In fact, we'll have to note some saints who went from Thiruvanmiyur to Tiruvattiur, Tiruvattiur to Thiruvanmiyur to sing, skipped Mylapore. And the 1A bus or 1C bus சொல்லுவாங்க, which used to go from Tiruvattiur to Thiruvanmiyur and touch Mylapore on the way. How could they have missed Mylapore on the way? Though it had a legend and all that stuff. The point is, many Devarams were not available to us when it was condensed. அது நிறைய ஊர்ல தெரியும்.
By the way, even this Thiruvanmiyur one that I quoted, one stanza is missing.
And he talked about Jains in Thiruvanmiyur. காலையில் we used to see a Tithankara statue in the Vanni மரத்தில் இருக்கும், along with the Nagas. Used to go around. Nobody knew what it was. But then suddenly after the last Kumbhabhishekam, it vanished. I used to go early for the Go Pujai and it vanished after that. So up I thought,
What vanished?
the statue of a Jain saint. It used to be. They didn't know what it was actually. And of course, we have accusations of many Hindu gods being Jain statues originally. I mean, we have Buddhist statues. We have some people talking about Parani, some people talking about Tirupati. Everything was a statue from another community. No? So, in a way, it represents the cross section of how Madras developed. He didn't have time. Perhaps he could have even talked about the Pillayar temples that we find, the Amman temples or the Ayyanar statues that the migrants brought in. That would have been, I think the next talk should be on a later temple, Pradeep. We are so happy to have you today. The next talk is on Saturday, not tomorrow, on Saturday. We have 2 talks on the changing geography of Madras by Shashwat. There was no Marina Beach 100 years back. So MMC was a hill. The Broadway was a ditch. You'll learn a lot of geographical facts about Madras if you come on Saturday. We also have an interesting talk for Jairam and Raghunathan on Devan, how the writer Devan saw Madras in Tupparim, Sambu and his other novels. That's on Saturday. And the next bunch of talks on Sunday, when we have a talk on statues of Madras, as well as one on S. Balachandar. We take personalities every year. So I hope to see all of you on Saturday. Thank you and good night.